and welcome to this workshop webinar on reading text and taking notes. My name is Christina Page, and I'm a learning strategist at KPU, and I'll be your guide through this workshop today. Before we begin our workshop today, I'd like to offer you two invitations. The first invitation is to prepare to apply what you're learning. You'll get the most out of this experience if you go beyond just listening and take some time to actually pause and do the activities as we're working on them in the workshop. So in order to do that, the second invitation is to gather a few materials around you. So the first is either a physical or an online textbook that you're using in one of your courses now, and then a paper or pen or a Word document for taking some notes along the way. Our learning goals for today's workshop are to use the SQ3R method of reading to select and record information from course texts, to compare 3 different methods of taking notes in a lecture situation, to evaluate which method of taking notes works best for you, and then finally, to connect your note-taking strategies to your review and test preparation. So before we introduce the new content, we're going to do an activity called the KWL Strategy. So KWL stands for Know, Want to Know, and Learned. So I would invite you to take a paper or a document and to divide it into 3 columns, just as you see here. In the first column, you're going to answer the question, what do I already know about reading text and taking notes? So this is your present knowledge that you're going to continue to grow and develop and connect as you learn the content in this workshop. And then in the middle column, I would invite you to write down, what do I want to know? So based on the learning goals we just talked about, what do you want to learn as you work through this material? And finally, the last column, you'll leave blank for after the workshop, and you'll have a moment to take some notes on what have I learned. So take a moment now, pause the video, and begin your KWL chart. So first, we're going to look at academic texts and other readings that we do in class. So a first question that often comes up is, why read academic texts? How does the reading fit in with the other aspects of your coursework, the in-class learning, or the assignments, or the other learning activities that you do? So where does reading fit in? The first thing I would suggest is that reading is important to prepare for class. So often you'll get more out of a class if you're able to do the reading before you go into class. This will give you an idea of the key concepts, the big ideas, the vocabulary that you're going to continue to explore in the class time itself. So rather than going into class and finding that everything is new in the class itself, you'll already have some base knowledge that you'll be able to continue to deepen in class, and you'll already know what questions you want to ask your instructor. The second reason is to complement what you're learning in class. So very often in a university level course, even though the class sessions are vitally important, you're not going to learn everything in class. So the reading that you're assigned outside of class is designed to complement and supplement that reading and to build your overall knowledge base. A third reason for reading academic texts is to strengthen your ability to read and write complex ideas. So even though academic reading can be challenging, the more and more you read these types of texts, the more you will be able to read these more easily and more fluently, and this knowledge is going to build into your writing ability as well, as you're able to construct more complex academic writing. So first, we're going to think about how we might read traditional or online textbooks. A key principle to keep in mind is that strategies for reading academic texts are different from those that you might use for other types of reading, like a novel, where you start from page 1 to the end of the book and read everything in order. A textbook or an academic reading, you might approach in a different way. So some key questions to look at the beginning is, how does this reading connect to the learning objectives of my course? And how is this textbook organized? Let's look at this example from a consumer behavior text to see how we might approach discovering how a textbook is organized. So I've entered this text, and I'm noticing that there's 8 main chapters. And then within these 8 main chapters, there's also some sub-chapters. So I'm going to see, what do I understand about how I might approach each of these chapters. So let's take this chapter as an example. So when I clicked on the main chapter heading, the first thing I encounter is learning objectives. So this is a really important page, and it's important not to skip over this, because this will help you define your goals for reading. Next, I notice here, and I notice that this is true for each of these chapters, is that it begins with key terms and concepts. So a glossary of the key vocabulary that you're going to find in this chapter. So this would be an important thing to review first. So you've got the key terms, you have the definitions, and by looking over this before you're reading, then you're going to have an idea what these words mean, and you're going to learn more about how they work in context when you do your reading. So here you're going to move into the main material in the chapter, and we'll explore in a few minutes a strategy that you might use as you read and take notes here. So there's a few of these content sections, and then finally, the chapter ends with chapter reflections. So these are additional questions and learning activities that might support your learning. So again, you might want to take a look, or your instructor might assign a few here that will allow you to really integrate and apply the concepts that you've already learned. Next, we're going to take a look at the SQ3R strategy. So this is a strategy that can guide how you approach your reading and how you connect your reading to your overall strategy. So let's look at the first steps before we see how we might apply it. So the first step is the survey step. So as we've done, as we looked over the organization of the chapter, this is where you would do a high-level overview of the content that you're going to find. So you would look at the learning objectives, you might look at the key vocabulary, you might look at any headings or charts or diagrams. And your purpose of this is not to read every word yet, but to get a big picture overview of what you're going to find in the chapter and what you need and want to learn as you read. The next step in the process is to question. And this is where you develop some reading questions that are going to guide your reading. So where you might look here, you might look at some main headings in the chapter, and as you look at a heading, you might develop your own question, so a who, what, where, when, why, or how question that you want to answer as you read that section. So this will help you to focus your reading on finding the answer to that question, finding the key information, and will help you to stay engaged and focused as you read. The next step is to read. So you're going to read that section, you're going to look for your key information, and once you've found the answer to the question, then you're going to take a moment and write it in your notes in your own words. So this is where the reading and the note-taking are going to connect. After you've gone through all of the headings, the reading, the note-taking, is the recite step. So what's that step? So the recite step is where you go back over your notes, so all these questions that you've written, the answers to those questions, and you're actually going to state them out loud. So this is a way of reviewing, of reinforcing your reading right after you've done it. And last, the review step. So this is where you then go back over your notes on a regular schedule to keep that material fresh in your mind. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So now, let's go back to our chapter and see how these steps might apply in context. So now that I know how my chapters are organized, I know what my survey strategy for this chapter is going to be. So I'm going to start with the learning objectives and make sure I read these and understand these well. So I know upon completing this section, students should define motivation and various types of needs and goals, summarize how marketers can use motivational concepts to develop marketing strategies, explain and define the key differences between different involvement levels, and discuss methods marketers may use to increase consumer involvement. So these are my overall goals as I approach this chapter. Next, in my survey step, I'm going to go over the key terms. And now I'm quickly going to skim each part of the chapter, looking at the headings. So I'm seeing information about needs, wants, and goals. Okay, these new terms to me, utilitarian and hedonic needs. Okay, prevention and promotion. So I'm skimming through here to get an overall big picture idea of what I'm going to find in this section. So that's my survey step. now I need to move on to the question step, and I'm going to use some of my high-level headings to guide me here. So first of all, I'm seeing this information about goals, needs, and wants. So I might create a question. How do goals, needs, and wants relate as it relates to consumer behavior? So I would write that question in my notebook, and then I'm going to start to read these sections in more detail and see if I can find the answer to my question. Once I've found it, I'm going to write it down. I see another heading, utilitarian and hedonic needs. So again, I'm going to create a question for myself to answer. What's the difference between utilitarian and hedonic needs? And now I'm going to find my answer. So I see my chart gives me some information here. And I have my definitions here. So utilitarian needs are practical and useful in nature, and hedonic needs are luxurious or desirable in nature. So I found my key difference here, and then I might add some examples that I have in the chart. So examples of utilitarian needs are groceries or gas. Examples of hedonic needs are luxury items. So now I found my key information that answers my question, and I'm going to move on to my next section and again create a question, read, find my answer, and write it down. So I'm going to continue moving through this cycle of asking a question, reading, and taking notes until I made it through to the end of the chapter. So that's my survey, my question, and my read step. And then I'm going to go back and do my reciting, so through all my questions and answers, and finally build my review strategy. So now that you know the 5 steps in SQ3R, it's time to apply them, put them into practice. So I would invite you here to pause the video and choose one of your current textbook readings that you're going to work through for one of your courses this week. And now practice the survey and the question steps. So you're going to go through the chapter, you're going to skim the reading, find out how it's organized and what main ideas you're going to expect to read. Especially keep a lookout for those learning objectives. And then choose one section of the chapter to do the question and the reading steps. So you're going to, again, look at your headings, write down the questions that you're going to answer, read and take notes. So spend about 10 minutes doing this, see how it feels, and then when you're done, come back to the video, press play, and we're going to move on to the next part of the workshop. So, why use SQ3R? So here's a few benefits of this strategy. So the first one is that it can help to support your focus and engagement when you're reading. So it can help you really focus on what is the main information, what might be less important to focus on, not quite as much, and to keep you engaged in really trying to find answers to the questions. So it will help you to identify the points that should be included in your notes. And a really important one is it can avoid wasting time rereading the full text later on. So a common error when we think about our time management and study is to think that, okay, this step of reading text and taking notes, oh, that takes extra time. I'm not sure that fits. But in the long run, taking the time to take those good notes is going to actually be a time benefit in the long run. Because when it comes time for your tests and exams and assignments, you're not going to need to go back and reread long sections of text that you've already read. You'll be confident that you've got the information that you need in your notes and you can work from there. And lastly, by using the strategy of questions and answers, you're making yourself a ready-made list of study notes and study questions. You can use these questions as a basis for your self-testing as you study for your exam. Okay, we're going to switch gears a little bit now and talk about other note-taking strategies. And we're going to think particularly about strategies that you might want to use when you're in a class or listening to a course video online. So let's think about this reflective question. Because information is available online or on PowerPoint slides, taking notes is not really necessary. Do you agree? Do you partially agree? Not quite sure yet? Or disagree? Take a note of your answer now and how that might change as you think about this material. So, why take notes? So the first reason for taking notes is to create a record of information for later review. So that's the reason where we often think, okay, do I really need to? I've got the PowerPoint. But there's a second reason to take notes. And when we think about learning, this might even be the most important reason. So it provides you a way to reflect on and organize the information you're learning as you're learning it. So taking notes on a lecture, on a video, on anything you're hearing is actually a learning strategy in and of itself. It helps you learn that material as you're listening and to think about how does it fit with other things you're learning. Another question that often comes up is, should I take notes on a laptop? Should I write them by hand? Is one or the other better? So here's what we know about that. Some studies do suggest that taking notes by hand is better for learning, as it helps you focus on selectively recording the main ideas in your own words. So a common myth about taking notes is the goal is to write down everything you hear. But the reality is, part of the exercise of taking notes, of figuring out what's important, is to hear and then think about what is most important here, what are the main points, and how do I write them in my own words? So because writing by hand can slow you down a little bit, it can help you not fall into the trap of writing down everything word for word and to just focus on the main ideas. So that can be helpful. However, there is a but. If you know that for you, a laptop is best, then a laptop is best for you. So the guidelines to keep in mind here are, don't try to type out every word the instructor says. So keep that principle in mind. You really want to focus on recording the main ideas. So it's not a word for word transcript, it's really a record of the most important points. Second, record ideas in your own words whenever possible. And third, if you're working on a laptop, be sure to close applications that might distract you when you're listening. So you're going to want to be as focused as possible on the class. Now let's take a look at the different types of notes you might want to create. So we're going to look at 3 different types in this workshop. The first are outline notes, the second are Cornell Notes, and lastly, we're going to look at mind maps. So these are all strategies that you might use for different things or at different times. And you might find that you prefer one or the other, and that's great. So the first type of notes, outline notes, are the kind you might most often think of. So these are the ones that have top-level headings, main points under those headings, and then more subpoints under those headings. So this would be an example of outline notes that I might have taken if I was listening to a talk or watching a video about how to study for exams. So I've noticed my first key area, my key topic was when to study. Then I have my 2 subpoints. So my next level heading, my next level information, study at times when you're most alert, if possible, study in blocks of 60 to 90 minutes. And then I had even a subpoint there that was talking about the basic rest and activity cycle. So this is one way that you might choose to take your notes as you're listening. The second strategy that you might want to use is something called Cornell Notes. So if you look at the image on this slide, you're noticing that you see a page that's divided into 3 different sections. So how does that work? So when you're doing Cornell Notes, you would divide your page just like you see it here. So the top of the page would have one large section, one really wide margin, and then you have a dividing line across the bottom of the page. So as you're taking notes, your main information would go in that large section on the right. So those would be your core notes that you're writing as you're listening, as you're in the class. So you might leave the room, and at that point, only that one section is going to be filled out. The other 2 are for later. So immediately after the class, that's when you're going to use the other 2 sections. So that wide left margin, that's going to be a space for recording key notes, key information. And it's also going to be a place where you might want to record the study questions that you'll use later on. So the left margin is a place to both reorganize, to really note key ideas, and to note the questions you're going to use to study later on. And then that last section at the bottom of the page, that's also a section you're going to use to review. That's called the summary section. And in the summary section, what you're going to do is you're going to write exactly how it sounds, a 1 to 2 sentence summary in your own words of what's on that page. So that will be a guide that you'll be able to go through as well. When you're reviewing a large section of notes, perhaps you can just read the summaries to reactivate and review your knowledge. The third strategy for note-taking is called mind mapping. So as you'll see, mind mapping is a visual strategy. It's non-linear, but it looks at how different topics are organized. So in the center of the mind map is where you would put your main topic. So in this case, the topic of the mind map is mind map guidelines. So that's in the center. And then what you see is you see different lines, different topics that are coming out of that center. So unlike in outline notes where they might be A, B, and C in a linear presentation, here your subtopics are going to move out into different branches from the center. And again, you can continue to build on those subtopics or related vocabulary or images and build out your mind map that way. So based on what you've just heard, which note-taking methods do you want to try? And it's also important to know, just as different styles can fit different individuals, so you might have seen these and felt, yep, I can see what my preference might be. Different styles also can fit for different purposes. So for example, the Cornell method can be great for taking notes in class because it gives you that space to both write the initial notes and to process them, to review them later on and summarize. That's going to help you to use those notes as a really good tool for test and exam preparation as well. Mind maps can also be useful to review big ideas in a course before exams. So I might use the mind mapping strategy, for example, if I've read a whole chapter and then I want to synthesize, to reorganize a different form of notes as I'm preparing to think through the material in a different way for exams. So you don't always have to choose one style for all situations. You might choose different styles of note-taking for different contexts and different purposes. So let's look at how do you use notes to review. So you've done that work, you've made the notes. So the process of making those initial notes will have supported your initial learning of the course material. Now that you have these notes, they're also going to be a really valuable resource for you in your review and study. So here's some principles to think through. So the first one is to review regularly. So it's often optimal to try and review once 24 hours after class, at least. So within that first day after class, and then on a regular schedule later on. So if you were using the Cornell method, that initial review right after class would be the time that you do your left margin with your keywords and your summary. And then you're going to want to come back to those notes later on. So a common mistake again is to save up all the notes and to wait to look at them until right before a major assignment, right before a major exam. It can be more valuable in your learning to come back to them on more of a regular basis. So with something like Cornell, when you have a summary, you might not have time to read, to look through everything on all of the pages, but just taking some time to read through those summaries again is going to reactivate those main ideas in your mind. Another thing to think about as you're using notes to review is using active learning strategies is going to be more effective than rereading. So when you're going back over notes, the purpose of using them is not necessarily to reread them word by word over and over. That can be a very passive way of learning, and there's more active ways that you can use those notes that are going to be more effective for learning. So what can happen when we're doing a lot of rereading? Our brains just start to tell us that we've seen this information before, it's familiar to us, we're kind of comfortable, but it doesn't give us a good idea of what we really know well and what we're still working on learning. So rather than rereading, you might want to try something like beginning with your SQ3R questions or your left column questions from the Cornell notes. So rather than reading all of the notes, you might start with your question and cover up the answer. And then read the question out loud, see if you can answer it from memory. If you can, great. You have a great indication that you've learned that material pretty well. If not, then you're going to go back and reread that little section and then try your question again. So you're going to be focusing on answering those questions out loud and from memory. And you're also going to focus your time on the questions that are more difficult for you. So as you're going through your notes and reviewing them, you might even want to develop a system to indicate perhaps a check mark for areas that you feel really confident about, and perhaps a star or a question mark for the areas that you want to go over and practice again. So other ways that you can use notes is to make other notes and visual organizers as you review. So again, a common mistake is to spend a lot of time trying to recopy notes or recopy them to make them just for the purpose of making them look neat. So that can take a lot of time, and recopying word for word, again, is not the most active way of learning. That said, it can be really, really valuable to make mind maps or charts or visual organizers from memory, so different notes again, to support your learning. So at this point in the workshop, you're invited to summarize and review your learning. So the first question is, what are the key things you have learned from this workshop webinar? So going back to the KWL chart that you made right at the beginning, what would you add in that "What did I learn" column? Write 2 to 3 points that indicate the most important things that you gained from this workshop. Now second, knowledge is most beneficial to us when we put it into action. So at this point, identify one action step that you will take this week to apply what you have learned. So an example of an action step might be, I'm going to try the SQ3R strategy for reading one of my chapters, and then see how it goes, see what works for you. Another possible action step would be that this week in class, I'm going to try using Cornell Notes as I take notes. So identify one very specific thing that you can put into action to put these new concepts to practice for you. So at this point, you've learned a lot of new information, and you might have a question that you really want to ask. So the best way to answer those questions, and perhaps to do some additional practice on these strategies, is to book an appointment with a learning strategist. So you can do that by going to tlc.kpu.ca. You're going to log in with your student number and password as you do for other sites at KPU. And then if you type learning strategist or learning strategies in the search term, you're going to find which learning strategists are available to help you. And any of the strategists you see on that page are going to be able to support you with that topic. So please do reach out and make an appointment if you have questions, and all the best as you apply your reading and note-taking strategies.